me all right. Um, I am Juliana LaRue, she, her pronouns. I am the Climate Policy and Outreach Coordinator at CTLCV, and we're so excited to have this training with you all today. I'm going to give you a quick intro about CTLCV so you know who we are a little bit before we start, before I kick it off to our speakers to start this training. So, CTLCV is a statewide nonprofit organization where we help give the environment a voice at the Capitol. We help communities and Connecticut citizens better understand the legislative process by community outreach and holding events like this testimony training. So with that, I want to introduce our two speakers, Lori Brown, who is the Executive Director of CTLCV, and Carol Rizzolo, who is a longtime voting rights activist and the co-founder of CT Shoreline Indivisible. Lori has been the executive director of CTLCV since 2000, working to protect Connecticut's environment by making environmental issues a priority for our elected leaders. Lori has organized multiple public education and grassroots lobbying campaigns and has worked on political campaigns to elect pro-environment candidates across Newark and Connecticut. She served on Governor Lamont's transition team as a member of the Environment Committee, which assembled to provide policy recommendations to the incoming Lamont administration. She's also registered to lobby at the Connecticut General Assembly, working with all of Connecticut statewide environmental advocacy groups to push for important environmental legislation. And of course, Carol, who is our second speaker. Carol's personal and professional path has been defined by membership in the family of helping profession. She followed a brief career in clinical genetics by a 20+ year career as a physician assistant, providing healthcare services and counseling to young people and their families. As she approached 50 years old, she chose to change professional direction and return to school and earn a doctorate in mythology and depth psychology. When the election cycle of 2016 came, she changed her entire focus to support voting rights nationally and here in Connecticut. Giving voice to the unheard voices in our nation has been an occurring theme in her life. At this moment, she runs 2 voting rights groups and serves on the advisory committee for 2 others. She is the co-founder of Safe Vote CT, a group who fought for absentee access during the pandemic and still advocates for easy, accessible access to the ballot. She is a co-founder of CT Shoreline Indivisible, like I said, a coordinator for Center for Common Ground, a board member for the Tri-State Maxed Out Women's PAC, and an ambassador for the campaign school at Yale. Wow, Carol, you have a lot of background. So I would like to kick it off to Lori, but before I do that, just know that we will be having Q&A at the end. So please send all of your questions through the chat. And with that, Lori will be talking about the nuts and bolts of testimony writing, taking you through the CGA website. So I'm going to hand it over to her.
Thanks, Juliana. I didn't know you were going to do the resumes. I haven't heard that in a while. Hi, everyone. As Juliana said, I'm Lori Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. And I am going to, there's a wide range of expertise that people that are listening right now. So there's plenty of veterans, I think, who have done a lot of testifying, but there's also a lot of people, I think, that are interested and have questions in actually how to do it effectively. And really kind of a refresher for some of us about those who haven't testified yet so far this session about, navigating all of the forms to sort of on the website of how to register, how to submit your testimony, how to watch the live YouTube, and how to basically get in the Zoom for testifying. So I am going to go through some of the nuts and bolts of that. But also I just wanted to mention that we will go into some of the tips and some of the specifics, things that people are going to want to include in some of the key testimony, key legislation that's coming up soon. So we're really hoping that this will be actively available for you to use and actually testify in some of the big hearings coming up. The first one being, of course, this next Friday, the 8th. There are a lot of important bills that are going to be on the agenda. So I wanted to point out, too, that last night, I'm hoping that many of you were on the IREJN webinar that really went into the top sort of environmental priorities, a number of them, what the bills did, what they didn't do, a lot of detail, and what the key components are that need to be fixed. And that's been recorded. So I'm hoping that maybe for those of you who didn't see that, that'll give you a lot more concrete details on the bills themselves, the environmental bills, the climate bill, the neonics bill, the PFAS legislation, and the food waste bill were discussed last night. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oh, and the other thing is I just wanted to mention before I forget, we've just put out our watch list, which is on our website at ctlcv.org. And so you can see all of the bills that we're tracking and link to them. And you can also see the testimony that we've been putting out and briefing papers that give background on the issues. And I can explain more of that later. So let me go ahead. I'm a little clunky with sharing these pages on the CJ site, but let me try to do that right now. Share my screen. Can you see it, Juliana?
Yep, you can see it.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Sorry, I can't see it. So, all right. So the first thing is really after the bills have been raised for drafting, and you know what the legislation is that you're interested in, you know, the way to follow this and to do pretty much everything you need to know about the hearings is going to be right on the CGA website, the Connecticut General Assembly website. And where I like to go right off the bat is always to the calendar of events. So this lists all the hearings, the events, the committee meetings, et cetera. And I'm going to kind of pop around in through here first to just sort of show you, this is this coming Friday. There's an Environment Committee meeting, followed by a press conference, followed by the Environment Committee public hearing. So I like to kind of just go right there. When you click on that, on any of these, this is what pops up. And you're going to be able to, from here, you can see the agenda of the bills. You can view all the testimony that's been submitted for the hearing so far. And you can also, when it's ready, you can see the speaker order. And if you're signing up for testimony, that's where you can go. So let me just kind of pop in. I like to do everything through as much as possible in one place through the agenda. So here's the public hearing agenda for this Friday. And there are a lot of bills on here that are really significant and prioritized. So what you can do is you see up here on the top, the first thing you're going to want to do is to register to speak. So when you click on that, it's going to take you to this page here, the Environment Committee public hearing, March 8th. Just make sure it's the right one. And you'd want to put in, you know, just your information. Mine sort of autofills, but you're going to put your name and address. Make sure that your email is the email that you're going to use, because that's where they're going to send you a unique link just for you. You can't share it. It's just for you to be able to enter the official Zoom meeting so that you'll be able to testify directly and be recorded and be seen. But as you go down through this form, just, you know, the organization, your job title, et cetera, you're not, if it's just for you, you're just going to select no, you're not an agency person. And if you're doing this for yourself, you just write in self, right? If it's not clear. And then it's just another authorization saying, yes, I filled this out. If it's me or for someone else, it's accurate. And then down here, you're going to have the option to either tell them that you're going to testify remotely or in person. You can change this before the deadline. But what happens is if you do it if you say you're going to be in person at the Capitol in the room, you click that. And if you decide before 3 or that you're actually going to have to do it remotely, you can do it remotely. You can change that before the deadline. You know, you can go back in. I'll show you how to do that. But if you do it in person, you'll also get the Zoom link. So you will be able to do it remotely if you've said that you were going to be in person. I'm not sure it works the other way around, but in any event, then you just hit register. And when you register, you will get an email that looks something like this. Oops. So you'll get this email. If you don't get this email, something may have gone wrong, but give it, give it a couple hours and then you'll get the link. You're definitely going to want to say yes. And down below, what's important, you should hang on to this email because it will tell you, and I'll get back to this, like what you can expect to happen once you get into the Zoom link or trying to get into it. But here in particular, you've got down below, if you have any problems at all, whether it's during the hearing, before the hearing, you can talk, or this one happens to be for the clerk of the Environment Committee. But James McNeely is the Environment Committee clerk. He's really good. He's great at responding very quickly if you're having a problem of any kind, but you have to do it by email. And then also up here, if you need to cancel or edit your registration, you would just go here. You can't do it for this now because it's not, hold on, it's not there yet. Let me see if I can get back. Whoops. My bar is, sorry. Okay. So I wanted to show you, once you have actually registered and you get that email, hang on to it, respond to it. What's going to happen next is that by 3 p.m. the day before, you have to be registered. If you're not registered by 3 p.m. the day before, you cannot testify. You can always submit written testimony, but you know, and the clock stops. And then what happens is all of the people who've registered, it's by a lottery, and they will print the list in the order of which the speakers are going to take place. So of course, for the 8th, it's not ready yet, but you're going to want to sign up by 3 p.m. on Thursday. So I'm just going to pop back over to last week's on February 28th, where we had the Environment Committee hearing. You see the same thing pops up, but here you can see not only the agenda, but you can view the testimony and speaker order. And when you click on that, here's all the testimony for all the bills that were heard by all the people that testified in bill order. And then here, click for speaker order. And so that's where you're going to get the list of who's speaking in what order. And that's really important, because the first thing you want to do is figure out where you are on that list. And I happen to be all the way down here at 45. And that's out of 71. So there was hundreds of people that submitted testimony, but only 71 that actually registered to testify. And I'll, let's see, I can explain a little bit how this is going to work when you're in the Zoom, but you can kind of get an idea about how many hours it's going to take to get to you. A really important thing to do is to listen in at the beginning of the hearing, because then you're going to hear, particularly from like the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or from Ag, you know, the agencies that are going to have a lot of information. They're going to be grilled by the lawmakers. You're going to hear a lot of things, you'll learn a lot, and it'll give you a sense of where the legislators are going with their questions, where their concerns are, and that kind of stuff. So I always recommend that people kind of listen into that. And also for the bill that you are interested in, if you know other people that are testifying on the bill or bills that you care about that are coming before you, I would suggest you try to listen to that, because on that particular bill, the legislators may have particular concerns or questions that if they aren't answered there, you can address them later on when you testify. So that's the thing to kind of keep tabs on. Let me go back to and back again. The other thing I wanted to point out quickly is that here, where it's YouTube Live, that's where the public can just click on it and you can see the live, you can watch the live recording. It so happens that the Environment Committee public hearing on the 28th, it's also where you can see the recordings of hearings that have taken place or committee meetings that have taken place already. But it's also where you go to see the live hearing. So you're not going to want to be in the Zoom meeting with lawmakers until, you know, close to when you're supposed to testify. But this is where you're going to want to watch out for it. See if I can get back. Yes. And then in terms of what happens when you actually get, so what happens is when you're getting to be about maybe 3 or 4 people away from your testimony, you're going to have to stick pretty close to your computer and wait until you see a pop-up that's going to invite you to actually join the Zoom as a quote unquote panelist. And so you have to accept that. It times out, but you have to accept that. If for some reason you're getting really close, like 1 or 2 away from your number coming up, you really need to email them again, email the clerk and say, hey, I might have missed this. Can you please send it again or whatever? And then once you accept that, you will actually get into the Zoom with all the legislators who are watching and any speakers that are kind of close up and pending. And what you're going to do is you're going to be in there. You're going to have to listen closely to the chair and wait for the chair to actually announce that the next person to speak is up, your name, and you will be automatically put in. So you're going to want to have your mic and your video on as soon as they call you, and you will be put on screen by the clerk, and you should start talking right away. You've only got exactly 3 minutes, and so I can go into the testimony and how to put that together a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but so you're definitely going to want to have your testimony. You're going to want to prepare it in advance so that you get your key points up first before the 3 minutes is up. If you go over your 3 minutes, they're going to interrupt you and say, can you please summarize? And if you think you're going to need a lot more time than that 3 minutes, if you've got a lot to say, then sometimes people will ask their lawmaker or someone on the committee that you may know specifically to ask a question. And if they ask you questions, then your time continues until they finished asking you questions. And we can go into that a little bit, but otherwise you've got your 3 minutes. So get your most important point up front. And we'll go into how tips on what to do. I want to quickly also go back just for submitting written testimony. So let me go back to environment? Okay, so going back to the agenda and submit written testimony. And again, this is when you've already written it, hopefully, and it's already been you've already put it into like a PDF if possible. But this is the screen you're going to get, Environment Committee written testimony. You're going to put your name in, all those pieces. And what you've got to do is you need to click on the hearing date. So you need to select the date because all the hearing dates are in here. So you're going to want to select the 8th, and all the bills are going to pop up that are being heard that day. If you have only one bill, and if it's the use of neonics, for example, if that's the only bill you have, then you continue on. If you support it, oppose, general comments, etc., you click there. And then here below, you can either type in your testimony directly. That's fast, quick, you can do it, but I would strongly recommend that instead you prepare your testimony because you can format it, you can make it visually appealing, you can have things that pop out that you emphasize. Otherwise, they're really just getting straight text. So they're going to get a whole lot of those just straight text, and you just want to make it as easy as possible for the legislators to read your key point. So that's where you would upload the file, right? And when you do that, you can just hit choose your file, and it should go to your directory. For me, it goes straight to the testimony. And these are all testimony I've submitted. But so, for example, you'd want to do, let me find this is being blocked. Hold on. So like the river buffer testimony or the data center testimony, for example. And when you click it just once, you'll see here, you can't see the whole name, but you'll see that the file's there. Now, if you have more than one item and you can hold the control button down and hit food scraps, you can hit legislative, et cetera, take it out. Now, you only want to do more than one if you're going to have the same position on all of them. So if you support multiple bills, then leave it on support and, add your testimony. You can put more than one bill in one testimony. I like to try to keep them as separate as possible, and I submit them separately, but you can put them all in one testimony and upload that file, but you're going to need to click on all the bills that it relates to. And then, of course, the last thing you want to do is hit the I'm not a robot, and that will time out. So don't do that until the end, and then you submit your testimony. So you won't get a notice. Let me go back out of this. You won't get a notice that says they've got your testimony, but what you can do, and it won't appear instantly. It has to go through some process, I think. I don't know if it's AI or what, but you do want to be sure that your testimony appears before the hearing, because that's when the legislators are most likely to read it, if they read it at all. That's when it's in front of them and when they have to pay attention. So try always to get your testimony in as soon as you know what you want to say. And certainly it's got to be in, if you can do it, the day before. It also helps to go back and look at other people's testimonies to see how yours sort of fits in with that and how many people are opposed or supporting. I mean, it can also give you some clues as to what include in your own testimony. If you're not really sure, find uh, you can find that on where the testimony is. A lot of this can also be accessed through the committee's webpage, the agendas and signing up and all that stuff. But I like to do it through the agenda because it's all right there. Let's see, I just wanted to, on the written, and I'm sorry, I had a couple of things I know I wanted to say. I'm probably going to forget a few things here. But I did want to say that short is good. Short is okay, especially for the written testimony. It doesn't have to be a lot of information. You really don't want to try to recap the bill. That's not what, they're going to already know what's in the bill. You don't want to sort of just lay out what the bill does. The most important thing that you can do to get their attention is point out to something that just specifically that's important. That's really an emphasis that you want to make. And in fact, that's where the more people testifying and submitting that emphasize many other things, but that emphasize a key point over and over again, that helps drill it into the lawmakers listening or reading that, there's a problem here, or this needs to be fixed, or this is particularly important, needs to be strengthened. And try to get your key point up front. I mean, it's important to list why it's important, like why is this, but try to get that key information up front, because lawmakers typically aren't going to read pages and pages of testimony. And it's always good to have something personal that you can add that says, for me, for solar, for example, I live in Bloomfield, and the solar, the first solar project was in my town, and it was a huge thing that really did a lot of good for my town and for our electric grid. And so, something like that, that just makes it personal. Or if you've had a personal experience with some pesticide issue or poisoning, or not seeing the birds like you used to see them, and that kind of thing. Just always something that makes it real for them. And I think, again, when you listen to what kind of questions came up, you can also expect that you might get a question from a lawmaker that you're not expecting. And if you don't know the answer, that's perfectly okay. Don't worry about that. Just tell them you'll get back in touch with them. I would avoid scolding lawmakers. It's easy to be really upset with how bad some of the stuff comes out, at first. And the goal here is to get them engaged enough to listen and find you credible, and that you have information to offer, and that, you may not be their constituent, but you are concerned enough to take your time to make this. And they know if one person came to testify, 100 others would feel the same way. So the other last thing I think I'll say quickly is that a really good thing to do is that whatever testimony you provide in writing, make sure you send it to your own legislator, because they're not necessarily on the committee and they don't know that you've testified. And I think you really get an extra shot at getting attention. Send them the testimony, both to the senator and the representative, and say, hey, I testified on this. Otherwise, they won't know. And I really care about this issue. And, could you please help? I mean, that I think would be very compelling to a lawmaker, and letting them know, of course, you're in their district. So I think and again, we'll go more into the detail of like the key piece of testimony, key piece that you might want to say when you're testifying on some of the bills on Friday, whether it's neonics or climate or food waste or PFAS, and that will come back later. So, and if I didn't mention it, did I say we have the watch list up? I think I did. Good.
Yep.
Asia, you might want to pop that link, Asia, in the chat at some point. And we'll also be putting materials up on backgrounders for these bills. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lori. If you want to stop sharing your screen, I can hand
Thank
it
you.
over.
I always forget. Yeah, got it. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for that. I know that was a lot of information. So if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. And then at the end, we will get to all of the questions And I know Lori wanted to talk a little bit about specific legislation, but we can get to that at the end as well. So now I wanted Carol to speak a little bit about directly talking to your lawmaker and tips and tricks on that. So I am going to pin her here. And the floor is yours, Carol. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to speak. I'm most appreciative, of course. Yeah, so there are a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight about what Lori was saying. Now, Juliana, somehow I have you pinned here, but maybe I can change that. That's okay. Anyway, yeah, so a couple of things to say. One, of course, is that Lori went through a lot. It was a lot of information, but the beauty of having it recorded is you can go through it quite slowly. You can go through it in your own time, and you can certainly see what it was she was saying, what she was describing in her screen share, so that when you open it up into yours, it can make sense. Yeah, so there are a few things that I do want to bring up, and I want to speak particularly that, you know, when you write a testimony to anybody, and actually maybe I should start it differently. Basically, the further down ballot, the closer it is to your front door. So when you have an issue, Lori was talking about PFAS, or it's one of the bills. I was listening to an appropriations committee hearing in the last session, and one of the issues was that there are several towns who have several fire trucks that are just sitting idle because they haven't had the money to clean them of the PFAS that's in the tanks. If that's in your town, the thing to do that's most effective is go to either your town council member or your mayor or whoever. You know, we've got 169 different governments in this state, right? Each town or city is their own. But those are the folks who tend to live around the corner from you, right? The same with your state rep. These are people you often see, you often know them, and go and speak to them about what is your issue, right? I mean, if you've got only two, this particular reference was there were 2 fire trucks. Only one of them could be used because state funding had run out. And if that's in your town, go and speak to the fire chief. Go and meet them. Go and speak to the first selectman. Whoever it is, these are the people who they're getting elected. They also live in your town. And they really have the most powerful voice because the mayors of Connecticut all have a collective mayor's meeting and they all talk to each other, right? So if enough of you or you and your family or whoever then go and say, you know, what's up with this fire truck sitting there? I never see it come out of the parking lot. You know, does that have anything to do with PFAS? Because, you know, if a fire happens in my house or in my next door neighbor, I need to have the full force of the fire department behind it, right? So it's a very local, very personal comment, right? I mean, I really can't stress enough the importance of really going local with a lot of this, including your state rep. Most of the state reps have about 13 or 14,000 people in their district. You want them to know who you are. When you submit testimony, you want them to say, hey, that's Lori Brown. Hey, that's Carol Rizzolo. I know her. We just saw each other in the grocery store. We just saw each other at the meeting. She just called me. These people are accessible and they want to be loved. Let's be clear. They're politicians. They want the job, right? They want their job and they want you to like them and they want you to support them. If there are people, if you live in a particularly Republican town, in a perfect world, you will not mind approaching the people who are anti-climate or who are basically fighting against the climate bills. Go and approach them. See what you guys have in common. I am an absolute dyed-in-the-wool Democrat activist voting rights person. Every month, pretty much every month, when it's not in session, I have breakfast with Vin Candelora. I'm in Guilford. He represents the northern half of Guilford. We each have kids, we each have family, we each care about stuff. And frankly, he's got a perspective that's not mine. And so it's been incredibly helpful to just contact him and say, listen, can we talk about food distribution? Because we both agreed on it, right? Fine, unless there are a couple of people who I wouldn't do this with. I'll just put that out there. There are a couple of, there are a couple of reps and a couple of senators that I would not be able to stomach sitting with. However, there are many others out there, right? Particularly if you're speaking about climate. I will also speak about voting. right? I would imagine many of us know any number of people who don't bother to vote. I'm registered, but I don't really care. What difference does it make? I think absentee ballots are filled with fraud because that's what I heard on Fox News. You know, there's all of this stuff about the challenges of voting and actually getting to the polls. We've spent 6 years getting past legislative bodies to the point where we could now have early voting in Connecticut. So now we will have early voting. Different towns will have different numbers of sites for that, and the sites haven't been announced yet. Early voting, for anyone who was paying attention to what just happened in New York 3, we banked early voting votes because then there was a blizzard on election day, right? So all of these people couldn't get to the polls. So bank votes early. The other beauty of doing early voting or absentee balloting is that it saves the candidates and the campaigns the funds and the manpower. They don't have to reach out to you again if you've already voted. So there are a number of ways that it helps and it works. We do have Connecticut was one of only 4 states that didn't have early voting. Mississippi, Alabama, New Hampshire, Connecticut. An illustrious group of 4, right? Not one that we wanted to be a part of. We now have early voting. And in November, we will have the opportunity to expand the absentee balloting into no excuse absentee voting. It'll be a ballot referendum. We will be doing a lot of work to get that information out to everybody to know it exists. But one of the interesting things that's happening now in this legislative session is, so the government, the FEC, decided that there could be no foreign spending, foreign funds coming into campaigns. Great, but they defined a campaign as something where a candidate is running. There's only one problem with that. They didn't include referenda. So the idea of foreign money coming into any ballot referendum that we have, for example, Senator May Flexer was just speaking about codifying reproductive rights into our Constitution. That will come up as a referendum. No excuse absentee voting will also be there as a referendum. So currently there is a bill that apparently has passed through the legislative committees a couple of times with full support, bipartisan support, to get foreign money out of our referenda practice. It needs people to talk to your local legislators and say, hey, I heard this bill is up. What's up with having foreign money in our ballot process, in our referendum? It should be corrected. It needs to be corrected to give the voters of Connecticut a voice. So, I mean, I can kind of talk forever about the importance of telling everybody you know to vote. Be sure anybody who will turn 18 in time for the elections is registered. If you have kids, if you have grandkids, if you have neighbors, if you have anybody you've ever met in your life, be sure no matter what state they are in, truly no matter what state they're in, be sure they have registered to vote, and then be sure they actually go to vote. Registering people is easy, especially sort of here. You've got a driver's license. If you touch the DMV, you're registered. It's an automatic voter registration, but it does not mean that people actually vote. Last thing I do want to highlight, a couple of last things. One is that a lot of people in Connecticut are unaware that 6 years ago, we had an even split Senate, 50-50 Senate, Republican, Democrat. A lot of us worked very hard to push it that next year to 12-24, so that people who believe climate is real and who believe the environment is a significant thing to fight for now have the majority in both houses and the governorship, of course. Now is the time. Speak to your local electeds, find your representative, give them a call, say, you know, I'd like to meet for coffee and talk to you because this is a problem where I live. This is an issue where I live. Pesticides are a problem. My neighbor's fabulous lawn is a problem because he's spraying, oh, I just lost the name of it. What the hell is the name of that stuff that just got,
Neonics?
It's a neonic. Yeah,
Neonic,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, and go talk to them. If you feel like you are not like some of us who are complete extrovert, I will talk to anybody and I have opinion for everything. However, if indeed that is not you, find a neighbor or a friend or a partner, and the two of you go together to speak to the legislator or to speak to the mayor or to speak to the senator. It is incredible how much power that has. People don't step up, they don't speak out, and then then it tends to be that people are frustrated because they never heard my voice in it. Take the responsibility as a voter, as somebody who's engaged. I mean, everybody who's on this call, there are 39 people on this call. If you're engaged enough to be in this call, you care enough to do this. So part of it's writing testimony, speaking the testimony. I will say just a couple of things about what Lori said in the written testimony. Once you hit that submit button, and I put this in the chat, once you hit that submit button, a bright red banner is going to come up on your screen. And it is going to say, this is all public testimony. Are you sure you don't mind that everybody now knows that you wrote this? If you do not, many people actually in our groups who are still working do not necessarily want their name publicly associated with what they're going to put in a testimony. If that's the case, put anonymous, first name, last name. The testimony will still go there. I would still send it to your legislators as that it's you. But some people actually are quite hesitant about being named publicly in a position that may not be very popular, particularly with their employers. So you can do that. When you write the testimony, just your name and your town. That's how it's signed, unless you sign it anonymous, right? But just take care. And last comment, if you are going to give a spoken testimony, don't read what you wrote. It's boring, right? We listened to Sarah Weddington, the woman who successfully argued Roe v. Wade. She gave a talk. She said, a speech read is like a kiss through the telephone. And that's exactly right. Do not read your testimony for sure. Just wing it. Talk about your personal experience. Why do you care about that? They'll read your written testimony. Testimonies should be submitted within the week of the hearing. I know Lori said try to do it before the day of. There's a little bit of room to move on that, but basically within a week, and send it to your personal legislators. Okay. I'm not sure I have a lot more to say other than get out the vote. Vote, canvass, call, door knock, text, whatever you can, postcard, whatever you can do. Be sure everybody knows they need to get out and vote this time. So,
Thank you, Carol. And I will say that this is such a great collaboration because environmental issues and voting rights go hand in hand, like Carol said, with all of the natural disasters that are going on all over the United States. What if one of those natural disasters happen on an election day? What are you going to do? Which is why it's very important to have easy, accessible access to the ballot, whether that's no excuse absentee voting or early voting. And so I know someone asked a question. I'm going to hand it back to Lori, because I know, Lori, you can answer this question and talk a little bit about how you can track a bill that's going to be on the Environment Committee agenda. And if you can talk a little bit about what's going to be on the committee agenda this Friday, and any advice you have on writing testimony on those bills.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I wanted to put that to the end to make sure that we kind of cover the nuts and bolts first. But yeah, there are many bills. If you look at the agenda, there's quite a few, and there's others that'll be putting testimony on besides the ones that I'm going to mention. But I think in particular, you're going to want to pay attention to the enormous climate legislation. I mean, it's just a huge bill with 22 sections, and it goes and hits so many different areas. That's one bill. Again, I'll come back and just say the key piece that you probably want to think about when you're putting your testimony in. The other thing is the food waste. As I said, the food waste prevention is a big issue this year. And that's a pretty major bill that we've been pushing for. A lot of groups have coalition effort have gone into that. And the climate bill was 5004. That's the climate action bill. The food waste legislation is Senate Bill 191. The neonics legislation is Senate Bill 190. And the PFAS, which I know I just saw it, it's on there, and I believe it's SB2, Senate Bill 292. So in particular, the climate bill is so big. You could pretty much pick anything out of it and emphasize that. But what you really want to talk to is the urgency of doing something. I mean, we all know they failed to act on climate last session. It's not, there's no excuse to let a climate bill die on the vine in any way, shape, or form. And the climate bill this year, because so much work has gone into it, so many groups have put provisions into it, that it's now the speaker's bill, which means it's a priority bill. And something will happen. That bill will pass. The key here is to testify and to put the pressure on them to keep those pieces strong that we really care about, because this is just the opening shot, right? The bill itself is all up for negotiation. There's going to be plenty of pushback in all kinds of areas. So this bill basically reestablishes, the state's commitment to addressing climate change. It puts forth a structure in ways that we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. It plans for the phase out of fossil fuel natural gas. It invests in renewable energy, and it does all kinds of things for business incentives, job force, workforce development, job training, all kinds of things that you could pretty much, and nature-based solutions too, which is a big piece of what I think is going to bring a lot more people also in support of this legislation. It's between the business and so forth. So really, it's the urgency of that. There is the recording that I see Connor Yukaitis put into the chat, that is a recording of the descriptions of the 4 bills that I just mentioned by the lead advocates in a simple way that you can pull from for testimony. So I would recommend before you leave this Zoom to actually go and maybe grab that link. There's also on that bill, there's some sample testimony. You don't ever want to just plug in someone else's sample testimony. You always want to customize it. Lawmakers are very quick to see language that's repeated over and over again. So you always want to keep something unique or short or, so there's also a great fact sheet on 5004, the climate bill, and you could pull from anything out of that. So that was one, and that's again in the chat. The food waste, the food scraps, what you really want to know about that is that you need to keep at all cost emphasize that you want to keep food scraps out of landfills, out of incinerators, out of the wastewater, including the garbage disposal. The whole point is to it's something like 20% of our waste is food scraps and then some. And so you want to emphasize, that there's sort of a scoring that EPA puts out that we want to codify in Connecticut. We want to be sure that as much food is diverted as possible. Much food, it really elevates sort of the donation aspect and the repurposing of food, both for humans and then for animals, and then for composting, and then after that, or anaerobic digestion. But the last thing you want is incineration or shipping it out of state, as we do 800,000 tons of garbage we ship out of state every year. So this could really reduce it. So that's sort of the gist. You want to make sure that on that waste bill, Senate Bill 191, it does designate food scraps as an item that's required to be recycled. So that elevates the food scraps. And it also requires municipalities to establish these programs to help residents separate their surplus food scraps. And it builds on the big food donation piece. So what it's missing, if you wanted to go that far, is it doesn't have any funding mechanism to support it. DEP is going to have to do it all without any extra money. And it should explicitly ban the commingling of food scraps with sewage sludge that contains toxic chemicals, which kind of ruins it for a lot of purposes. So that's kind of a big thing on the food waste. And then the neonics, the thing you should remember most is that they're calling, there's a great fact sheet. There's all kinds of proposed testimony. This bill, as it came out, was an absolute disaster. It was, the thing you have to remember is the bill that came out last year is the one that needs to pass. The language in that bill, it was, do I have it in front of me? Yes. It was, last year's bill was 963, Senate Bill 963. And so all the advocates are pushing very hard to get back to that language. The bill that came out this year is actually just, there's a lot of mistakes in it, and it doesn't do, if it were to pass the way it is right now, it would do absolutely nothing to solve the problem. So what we need to do is to fix the language in the bill and prohibit the use of neonicotinoids. And it has all the exemptions in it that are needed for agriculture and other specific uses. But we've got to get it out of our environment and out of the way, public health wise. So that would be something particularly to push, is that it really needs to have the language from last year. And then finally, PFAS, which I know Carol spoke a lot about, really personally, making sure that, you know, that this is a local, hyper-local thing that needs to happen. It's everywhere. It's a forever chemical. You cannot dispose of it safely, and it's terrible. I mean, I would spend more time on this one. I would probably spend more time explaining how awful that PFAS really is. And it's going to be a long time and a long effort to get rid of it. But what we have to do is stop it at the source. It's got to be taken out of and not allowed to be sold. Products that it targets, for example, cosmetics and furniture and clothing and all those, you know, non-stick stuff, stain resistant. I mean, it's everywhere in everything. It's in makeup, you know. We've got to get products not able to be sold in Connecticut if PFAS is being intentionally added to that product. That's basically what the bill does. So it's going to be expensive. It's going to take a long time, but we all have to, and I think there's a lot of bipartisan support. So really just supporting the bill would be the best thing to just weigh in on. I'll stop there because I know we're getting close to the end. Are there specific questions?
Yes.
And I'll try to be shorter.
No, that's okay. So Roland, who is one of our great advocates we work with, asked if it would be helpful to write a petition to the Environment Committee. I don't know, on a certain bill. I'm guessing on food waste. Roland, thumbs up on that or no?
Well,
Yeah.
you mean a petition? You mean getting like a sign-on letter, or, you know, hundreds of, yeah. I mean, you can submit anything as part of your testimony. I think the most important thing is where those people come from. You know, are they in the district? Are they, I mean, petitions oftentimes are great, show that there's a lot of support, but it's more effective to have a handful of people in a particular district that can go and make those phone calls and pressure individual lawmakers. I think petitions probably fall kind of, you know, they're important. They've been a staple of the environmental movement for a long time. But that more granular approach, I think, is more effective.
Awesome. Someone asked, where can I find information on all of these bills? They won't remember all of this information. This is being recorded, and we just came out with our watch list, which Connor just put into the chat. I don't know if Lori, you have any other?
Yes, we do have, now each group, each bill has usually a whole coalition of groups working behind it. And those groups, including the League, put out action alerts. And if you just, for us, if you just sign up, go to our website, ctlcv.org, and just click on, you know, get action alerts, we'll send you information before the bill is going to be heard. Like we just sent out today an alert on Friday's hearing. And we gave, you know, sample information, fact sheets, you know, here's where you register, here's where you submit testimony, you know, that it's kind of packaged up, and a lot of groups do that. And on our website also is the watch list, which gets updated periodically. So most of the key bills that are potentially going to be scored, all of the bills on there have been raised publicly and will have a hearing, have already had a hearing. Whether they get out of the committee or not, that's a different matter. By the way, the deadlines for most of the key committees, they're all a little different, but they're all pretty much the week of March 20, the last week in March. So all of these bills will have had hearings, and they will have either been ignored and never to be seen again, or they will get voted on, debated, voted on, and out of committee, or voted down in committee, and then move on. And we'll keep people informed on the status of the priority bills. And again, I would strongly recommend looking at the briefing papers if you want to know something about the issue itself. these briefs were done by the advocates leading on those issues. They're, for the most part, there are bills that are not up in our briefs, but most of the bills are issues that are before the legislature this year. And the advocates have indicated, this was before the bills were drafted, have indicated what they need to see as a solution. So it gives you a good background, data to draw on, some factoids, things you can include in testimony. I don't know if that's a start anyway.
Yeah, thank you. And Asia put in the chat our briefing paper link and a link to sign up for our action alerts. Carol, do you have any last questions or comments before we wrap up? Because we're at the end of the hour.
Just very, very briefly to say, you know, most of the folks, of course, are not as well versed in all of this stuff as Lori or the advocates or the rest of us. You don't have to be an expert on any of this. If it's something that you care about and you're passionate about, that's what your testimony should be. I'm passionate about it because my grandkids roll in the grass and I am worried about Roundup. I mean, just, you don't have to be an expert. It doesn't have to be long. If you've read some of the previous testimony that's been submitted on this particular bill, then say, you know what, I fully agree with what Lori has said, and this is why. And then quote a little bit of what Lori said. Lean into the experts. They've written a lot of testimony. It's there for you to use, but just make it brief, make it your own. That's more important than anything. And by all means, contact your local folks. Be sure that they know to look for your testimony. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. And I don't see any more questions in the chat. So we are getting to the end of the hour. So I would just like to thank everyone for joining us today. This is being recorded, so we're going to send this out as soon as possible. We're going to put it on our website, ctlcv.org. So I just, again, this testimony training is at the perfect time because this Friday, as Lori mentioned, the Environment Committee is holding a hearing with very crucial bills pertaining to the environment and climate change, and your lawmakers and the Environment Committee need to hear your voice. These are very important. So I hope this training was helpful and inspired you to write your own testimony. Before we go, I'm going to put Carol and Lori's email in the chat if you don't have it. So if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to give them an email and they should get back to you. But I'm going to stop recording.